Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're taking a look at, well, a really tough event. July 4th, 2022 in Highland Park, Illinois.
Yeah, definitely not a celebratory memory for anyone. The Highland Park July 4th parade shooting. It's one that stuck with a lot of people.
Absolutely. And we're going to try to unpack it all. We've got news articles, we've got reports, the whole nine yards. We really want to get into the specifics of what went down that day.
The aftermath, the legal side of things.
Yeah, all of it. We're going to kind of connect all the dots, help people see how everything fits together, starting with the timeline, right? Like, when did this all actually begin?
Right, so the shooting started around 10:14 a.m. Central Daylight Time.
Okay, 10:12 in the morning.
Hmm.
And the parade itself, how long had it been going on at that point?
Only about 15 minutes, actually. Started at the intersection of Laurel and St. John's, moving north, and was going to head west on Central Avenue.
So just getting started, really. And then this all happened right at Central Avenue and 2nd Street.
Right in downtown Highland Park.
And it's important to remember, we're talking about Highland Park, north of Chicago, right? A lot of people might not know the area. It's got a pretty substantial Jewish population.
And right next door you have Highwood, which has big Italian and Hispanic communities too.
So a real mix, a lot of different folks coming together, especially for something like a 4th of July parade. Families, kids, everyone out there.
A very typical community event turned horrific.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, the shooter had this, strategic advantage almost. He was up high, firing down on everyone.
From the rooftop, yeah.
Yeah.
The Ross Cosmetics building, right on the corner of Central and 2nd. And the way he got up there, an unsecured ladder just left there.
It's crazy how sometimes these things come down to such basic security oversights.
Absolutely. So from that rooftop, he unleashed this barrage of gunfire. The weapon he used was a Smith & Wesson M&P 15, a semi-automatic rifle. He had three 30-round magazines.
And he fired, get this, 83 rounds.
83 shots.
Yeah.
Just imagine that chaos, that panic.
It's impossible to even fathom. 7 people died that day. Another 48 were wounded, either hit by bullets or shrapnel. And it wasn't just people watching the parade. It was participants, too.
People on the floats, musicians. There's this one detail that's really stuck with me, actually, from some of the reports. There was a klezmer band on one of the floats, and they kept playing for a bit, even as the shooting started. Like, people were already running, but the music just kept going for these few surreal moments.
Wow. It really says something about how sudden and unbelievable this whole thing was.
Totally. Just a normal day, a celebration, and then instantly transformed into this nightmare. So, in those immediate moments after the shooting stopped, what happened?
Well, there was a huge response from law enforcement. Over 100 officers from different agencies all converged on the scene. But by that time, the shooter had already stopped firing and he managed to get away. They were closing in on the rooftop, but he was gone before they could get to him.
So he got away, but didn't quite manage a clean getaway, right?
Right. In all the rushing around trying to escape, his rifle, the Smith & Wesson, it actually fell out of his bag. Police found it very quickly. And from there, we know he drove toward Madison, Wisconsin, still had another rifle with him, a Kel-Tec Sub-E 2000.
And there was some talk that he might have been planning another attack.
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing. Apparently, he considered hitting up another 4th of July celebration in Wisconsin, but thankfully decided against it. He also ditched his cell phone somewhere along the way in Middleton, Wisconsin, and then it became a manhunt, trying to track down his car.
A Honda Fit, right. And that's actually what led to his capture.
Yeah, a couple spotted the car, recognized it from the descriptions that were circulating, and they called 911. This was around 6:30 p.m., so more than 8 hours after the shooting had happened. Police caught up with him in Lake Forest and took him into custody without any further incident.
So, good police work, but also just, like, the vigilance of regular people, being aware and reporting what they saw.
Absolutely. Turning to the victims now. Like we said, 7 people tragically lost their lives, ranging in age from 8 years old all the way to 88.
A real cross-section of the community. It really drives home that this could have been anyone.
Yeah, just awful. 2 of the men who were killed were from Mexico, and 3 of the victims were members of the Jewish community. We know one of the victims was a 64-year-old mother. 5 of them died right there at the scene, and 2 more passed away later at the hospital from their injuries.
And on top of those 7, you've got the 48 people who were injured.
Right. Highland Park Hospital alone treated 26 people, mostly with gunshot wounds. Some of them had to be transferred to other hospitals for more specialized care. And one of them, tragically, is now a paraplegic.
Just like the ripple effect of this one event is massive.
It's hard to even grasp. So the person responsible for all this, Robert Eugene Crimo III, he was apprehended that same evening, right?
Yeah, that's right, a 21-year-old. And at first, they charged him with 7 counts of first-degree murder.
But those charges, they got a lot more serious as the investigation unfolded.
Oh, yeah, they did. By the end of July, a grand jury had indicted him on 117 felony counts.
117. It's almost hard to even, like, wrap your head around that number. What did that actually include?
So 21 counts of first-degree murder, that's 3 counts for each of the 7 people who died. They also hit him with 48 counts of attempted murder and another 48 counts of aggravated battery, 1 for each person who was injured.
Wow. So what happened next? Did this actually go to trial?
Well, it was definitely headed that way. Initially, he pleaded not guilty, and the trial was set for early 2025. There was actually a hearing in June 2024 where everyone thought he might change his plea, but he didn't.
So they were gearing up for this big trial, and then what?
Then, just before the trial was supposed to start, March 3rd, 2025, he changed his plea.
Okay, and what did he ultimately plead guilty to?
He pleaded guilty to everything. All 21 counts of first-degree murder and the 48 counts of attempted murder. The aggravated battery charges had been dropped earlier on. His sentencing is set for April 23rd, 2025. And under Illinois law, for multiple first-degree murder convictions, it's an automatic life sentence. No chance of parole.
So, legally speaking, that's the end of it. But the big question that everyone kept asking, even before the trial, was why? What was his motive?
Yeah, and that's one that's been really hard to pin down. Officially, it's still under investigation. Even though Highland Park has a large Jewish population and we know Crimo was seen near a synagogue a few months before the shooting, investigators haven't been able to find any solid evidence of a racial or religious motive.
Which makes it even more confusing when you consider what we know about him from his online activity, right?
What? Right. His online presence was, well, let's just say it was deeply troubling. He seemed to be drawn to all these far-right and neo-fascist ideologies, lots of what they call ironic Nazi and anime memes, music with fascist themes, and then stuff that experts have said was basically mass shooter ideation, all taking place in these online spaces, kind of like 4chan.
And this was separate from QAnon, right?
Yeah, they said it was distinct from that whole thing.
Yeah.
So he wasn't just passively consuming this stuff online either. He was creating his own content under the name Awake the Rapper. Put out some music videos that were really disturbing, depictions of mass shootings, characters getting shot by police. One video even had this voiceover that said, "I need to just do it. It is my destiny."
Yeah.
It's all been taken down now, thankfully.
And I remember reading something about a message board, too.
Oh, yeah, he was active on one of those really graphic message boards, the kind that are all about death and violence. Apparently, he even posted a video of a beheading just a week before the attack. It's like,
Yeah.
It's almost too much to process.
It's just horrifying. And then you've got his political leanings, too. He was very open about supporting Donald Trump.
Yeah, attended far-right rallies, sometimes even dressed up in, like, Where's Waldo costumes while he was at these counter-protests. It's like, it's hard to make sense of it all.
It really is. And then you look into his family history, and it paints this whole other layer onto the picture.
A pretty troubled childhood by the sounds of it.
Yeah. According to police records, there was this incident when he was really young where his mom was accused of child endangerment. And then between 2009 and 2014, police were called to their house almost 20 times. 9 of those calls were for domestic violence between his parents.
So a very volatile home environment. And it sounds like there were some pretty serious warning signs, some encounters with the authorities, even before the shooting.
There were 2 in particular that stand out. The first was in April 2019, a 911 call about a suicide attempt. Mental health professionals ended up handling that one.
Okay, so that's a big red flag right there.
Huge. And then just a few months later, in September 2019, a family member called the police saying Crimo was threatening to kill everyone. Police went to the house and took away 16 knives, a dagger, and a sword from him.
Wait, they confiscated all those weapons, but he wasn't charged with anything?
Nope. His father said the weapons belonged to him, and both parents denied that Crimo had made any threats. They did file a clear and present danger report with the Illinois State Police, though.
Which, looking back is pretty chilling considering what happened later.
It really is, because just a few months after that report, in December 2019, Crimo applied for a HEFA-wide card, a firearm owner identification card. And because he was under 21, his dad had to sponsor the application.
And they approved it. even with that report on file.
They did. In January 2020, the FOI card was approved. And after that, he passed 4 background checks when he bought firearms in 2020 and 2021.
Including the Smith & Wesson used in the shooting, I assume.
Okay. Yeah. He bought it online from a dealer in another state, and then it was shipped to a local store in Lake Villa for him to pick up. All perfectly legal.
It really makes you wonder, like, what's the point of these checks if someone with that kind of history can just slip through the cracks?
Right. It's a really tough question. And then there's what Crimo himself has said about all of this since he was arrested.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing something about that. Didn't he claim it was all staged?
Yeah, in 2023, a video came out of a phone call he made from prison. He said the shooting was a false flag operation and that his interviews with the police were coerced. Someone connected to one of those conspiracy theory websites shared the recording.
Which I guess isn't surprising considering his online activity. What about his father? Has he said anything publicly about all this?
He has. Robert Crimo Jr. has said that he didn't see any warning signs in the days leading up to the shooting, and he's even said that he doesn't regret sponsoring his son's FOI card.
Wow. And he must have been aware of his son's, fascination with violence.
Yeah, he even mentioned that his son had talked about the Copenhagen Mall shooting the night before the Highland Park attack.
That's really chilling. And of course, the father ended up facing legal consequences himself, right?
He did. In December 2022, he was charged with 7 counts of reckless conduct for sponsoring his son's gun license application.
What was the outcome of that?
He pleaded guilty to 7 misdemeanor counts of reckless conduct, got sentenced to 60 days in jail and 2 years of probation, so, some level of accountability there.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what it'd be like to be in his shoes, but at the same time, you have to wonder about the responsibility of parents in these situations.
Absolutely. And then there's the impact this all had on the community itself.
Mm.
I mean, Highland Park, but also the whole surrounding area. It was just devastating.
Yeah, that much is clear from everything we've been looking at.
I mean, right after the shooting, tons of Chicago suburbs canceled their own July 4th celebrations. The Ravinia Festival, which is this huge music venue in Highland Park, canceled all their shows for days. And then there was the outpouring of support for the victims and their families. That GoFundMe for the 2-year-old boy who lost both his parents, that raised over $3.2 million.
It's amazing to see that kind of generosity, especially in the face of such a horrible tragedy.
It really is. And, there was a lot of well-deserved praise for the law enforcement officers who caught Crimo. The Small Business Administration offered low-interest loans to businesses in the area that were impacted, and the Highland Park Community Foundation gave out grants to victims and nonprofits that were helping with the recovery. Even Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins, he lives in Highland Park, and he put on this whole charity wrestling event to help a child who had been injured in the shooting.
So it's like amidst all the heartbreak, you also see these incredible acts of resilience and community coming together.
Definitely. And the shooting also led to some pretty significant changes in Illinois law.
Oh, yeah, the assault weapons ban, right?
Exactly. In January 2023, Illinois passed and signed into law a statewide ban on assault weapons. They already had a ban in Highland Park itself, but this expanded it to the whole state. It also put limits on magazine capacity and made it so that people who own these kinds of weapons before the ban had to register them.
A direct response to what happened in Highland Park. And what about the initial reaction from officials, like at the federal level?
Yeah, so President Biden was obviously deeply affected. He called the shooting senseless and said the federal government would do everything they could to support the community. He also used it as an opportunity to push for stricter gun control measures. Vice President Harris echoed those sentiments. And locally, officials in Highland Park expressed their grief and offered immediate support and resources to anyone who needed them.
So the usual mix of reactions, but I guess in this case, it also really sparked that legislative action at the state level.
Absolutely. But then, of course, you also had the spread of misinformation online, which always seems to happen after these kinds of events.
Yeah, the internet can be a real double-edged sword in these situations.
It really can. Almost immediately, you had all these false claims and conspiracy theories popping up online. People were saying the shooter was transgender, which was completely untrue. And then there was the whole false flag operation theory, which also had no basis in reality. Thankfully, journalists were quick to debunk these narratives, but they still caused a lot of unnecessary pain and division when people were already dealing with so much trauma.
It's a shame that we even have to deal with that, It just adds another layer of complexity to an already tragic situation.
It really does. So let's take a step back now and try to tie it all together. We've gone deep into what happened that day, the 4th of July, 2022, in Highland Park. The shooting itself, the police response, how they finally caught Crimo, the devastating impact on the community, the legal battles, and the changes to the law that came out of it all.
It's been a heavy conversation, but it's so important to really unpack these things and try to understand them.
I agree. And it raises some really important questions, too, like knowing what we know now about the warning signs with Crimo and how he was still able to legally buy the gun he used. It makes you wonder, what can we actually do to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again?
It's a huge question. It really makes you think about mental health resources, about how we keep our communities safe, about gun control laws. Where do we even begin?
Exactly. It's a multifaceted issue, and this deep dive has only scratched the surface. But I think it's given us all a lot to think about, and hopefully it'll encourage people to keep having these conversations about community well-being, mental health, and responsible gun ownership. Because these aren't easy topics to talk about, but they're so incredibly important.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more.